coming to St. Louis and talking about these ideals, I was pulled aside by one of the vice presidents, and he said, we're not necessarily about all these good things, reducing waste and feeding the world, we're about making money.
From its headquarters in St. Louis, formerly the gateway to the West for frontier settlers, Monsanto hopes that American gene technology, patent-ready technology, will go on to conquer the world. Securing resources for itself is at the top of the company's political agenda, which is why it rapidly succeeded in pushing through approvals for the new products.
The word was cooperation with government and regulatory agencies. Now, you have to read between the lines. What does cooperate mean? I mean, you know, cooperate means you shake hands.
Enjoying an inside route to the corridors of power, Monsanto was able again and again to place employees in influential positions. Through Washington's revolving door, corporate players continually traded posts at the licensing authorities, later returning to high-paid board positions at the company. In the early 1990s, a blatant scandal played out behind the scenes at the nation's capital. It was about nothing less than the fundamental decision on whether genetically modified organisms should be allowed to enter the food supply at all. Several FDA inspectors expressed great concern after studying the test results. The government held back the papers in which they explained their reservations, however, as described by a critical FDA expert.
He said that they believed it presented unique animal and human food safety concerns. Those were his words, unique food safety and animal safety concerns. And he emphasized that even a slight shift in a constituent of a plant that might not have an effect if humans ate it, because of the level at which they would consume the plant, he said that same plant can be a major constituent of the farm animal's diet, and therefore could create major problems for the animal, and then for the human consumer of either the meat or the milk or the eggs of that animal. And that's why they felt that it was a very serious matter and had to be carefully tested.
These tests were never conducted, however, just as the critical FDA memos were never publicized. Monsanto had managed to place its own man in a key post at one of the authorities. Gene technology was green-lighted.
This, I believe, is one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated by any government in history.
The current U.S. president demands that world hunger must be fought, with American gene-modified food, no less, to the delight of the biotech companies.
There was even laughter at the idea at a luncheon table of the idea that was now, just then, coming out about how it was going to help the poor people and the poor nations of the world. It was a cynical laughter and joking about that notion.
For the sake of a continent threatened by famine, I urge the European governments to end their opposition to biotechnology.
The concept that genetically modified crops are needed to feed the world is not only a terrible spin and lie, it actually works against feeding the world. It gives the impression, first of all, that production is the key point in feeding the world, when in fact we have more food per person than any time in human history, and 30,000 people die every day from starvation. So it's not production. The second thing is, genetically modified crops, on the average, don't increase yield. They actually decrease yield so far. It's basically a public relations spin, and it sort of creates this moral dilemma for those who are against the technology to feel, well, how can I be against the technology if it'll help starving people?
UN Special Correspondent John Ziegler recalls the resistance to gene technology at the highest political levels.
Monsanto totale Aggressivität, auch diffamierend, über natürlich ihre Leute in der amerikanischen Regierung, das habe ich erlebt. Ich wurde dann in der Generalversammlung in New York im November vom amerikanischen Botschafter ganz massiv angegriffen, beschimpft, gesagt, ich bin verantwortlich für die Hungertoten in Sambia.
Ziegler had dared to criticize Monsanto for wanting to import genetically modified seed into the African country under the pretense of delivering aid supplies, despite legislation there forbidding it.
75% der Bevölkerung, vor allem in Schwarzafrika, leben im Elend. Wenn dazu noch die Finanzknechtschaft der Patentmogule käme, dann wäre es diese Völker geschehen.
In the USA, pig breeders like Jerry Roseman have other problems. Environmental activist Jeffrey Smith wants to help them because Roseman has lost his entire operation. He thinks it has something to do with the feed. For years, he fed his animals only genetically modified corn.
The females, the pigs, ultimately we had three outcomes. They were either sterile, they were in the true false pseudo-pregnancies, or they delivered a bag of water. And either way, there was zero output and 100% expenses going into these animals.
So what was the upshot of all these problems?
The end result here was that I could not incur the debt anymore. I couldn't pay back. We lost right at $1 million with this thing. I lost my farm and my livelihood.
The former pig farmer says that his attempts to have the genetically modified feed tested were blocked by massive opposition.
I was totally appalled at the treatment that I received from the USDA, the EPA, and the FDA at the national levels and at the state levels. Everyone tried to make this go under the floor. Their comments from the seed corn company was that we will ignore Jerry Roseman and eventually he will starve and go away and the problem will no longer exist.
Not only at Monsanto, but all over the world, genetic researchers are studying the pig. Munich professor Eckhard Wolf has observed during the last 10 to 15 years a significant decline in the fertility of pigs and cows during exactly the same period in which they have been given more and more genetically modified feed. Does genetically engineered corn play a role here, for example in the Roseman case?
Es hängt natürlich davon ab, in welcher Weise dieser Mais gentechnisch verändert ist. Aber wenn es sich beispielsweise um BT-Mais handelt, der trägt ja ein Gen, was gegen einen Parasiten letztendlich wirksam ist, könnte ich jetzt keinen direkten Zusammenhang zur Fruchtbarkeit mir vorstellen.
Wolf's studies are co-financed by the industry. The German company BASF is hoping to obtain a lucrative patent, just like Monsanto. The genetic scientists can't imagine that unknown protein compounds in the genetically modified feed products could be responsible for the decline in births.
Es ist sicher nicht vollständig auszuschließen. Auf der anderen Seite denke ich, dass beim Monitoring solcher neuen Sorten auch Proteinmuster natürlich erfasst werden.
But that is exactly what doesn't always happen. We need only think of the ex-Monsanto employee Azevedo, who reports that products with utterly unknown protein compounds were allowed to enter the food chain.
Monsanto introduced the first genetically modified hormone for animals, bovine growth hormone. And what we know now is that the research appeared to be rigged to avoid finding problems. When they wanted to show that the hormone did not interfere with fertility in cows, they allegedly added cows to the study that were pregnant prior to injection. Other researchers pasteurized the milk 120 times longer than normal to try and destroy the hormone.
The introduction of a hormone to boost milk production in cows shows the kind of massive pressure exerted to launch new products on the market. In Washington, Jeffrey Smith meets with a former inspector at the FDA, Richard Burroughs. The man is a true patriot with children serving in the U.S. Army. Nevertheless, he refused to license the genetic product because the examiners found the test strips from Monsanto insufficient and demanded new ones.
I mean, they could have come in and argued the science of it at a higher level and gotten it taken care of, but for some reason, since I guess I was the obstacle that had asked them to do these extra studies, which were not completed to my satisfaction, it was easier to get rid of me than it was to do the studies, and a whole lot cheaper. So somewhere in the chain of command, they made this point, and that person listened to the money and the politics and agreed that the best way is to get rid of me and keep the products. That was how they finally got me out of the end stages of the review process. They finally said, well, you're no longer competent to do your job, you're fired.
Obstacles are placed in the path of the press as well. Popular reporter Jane Ackery researched for Fox News the side effects of the bovine growth hormone, such as udder infections and pus residues in the milk.
We found that there is a difference in the milk. Monsanto says there isn't, but there is. Their own studies show that the milk has a higher spin-off hormone called IGF-1, which is a very potent growth hormone. It's found in mother's milk. It helps babies grow. It also helps cancerous cells grow. It helps all cells grow. On the Friday before the Monday air date, it was going to air on the 6 o'clock news. It was a 5-part series called The Mystery in Your Milk. Monsanto sent the first of 2 very strongly worded letters that said, stop the reports, your reporters are idiots, their sources are incompetent. And a week later they sent a second letter from a New York lawyer that said that there would be dire consequences for Fox News if the story airs.